Hello YouTube, this is Alex and Paul.
Hi.
We're doing our second video of MTG 101. This involves phases of your turn. So the first phase is your beginning phase, and that involves 3 steps. First is your untap step, where, say your creature was tapped, you untap your creatures and your lands.
In this case, we have 4 forests and 4 mountains that we've theoretically used to cast the
Verdant Force.
8-drop Verdant Force.
After your untap step is your upkeep step, which is where cards like Verdant Force, which say at the beginning of each upkeep, put a 1/1 green sapperling creature token onto the battlefield. So during your upkeep step, because of this effect, you would get 1 sapperling token. Next is your draw step, where, say this was your library over here, since you can't see over there, you would draw 1 card.
In this case, a forest. Now your beginning phase
is done. So you move on to main phase 1.
Alright. From your main phase is when you can play all of your creatures, all of your sorceries, and all of your artifacts, unless otherwise stated.
And your instance, if you want to play it then.
If you want to play it then. Usually you don't, but you might want to, depending on the play. But for this scenario, to teach you something, I'm going to do something kind of stupid. I'm going to tap all 8 mana, even though I'm not going to use all of it, to play Lava Axe. It's a 5-drop, so I'll have 3 unused mana, but I'll do this to do 5 damage to my opponent, who currently has a Gold Forged Sentinel. So I do 5 damage to them. Say they were at 20 health before, now they're at 15. Now our main phase is done.
Which moves us into combat. So, there are 4 steps to combat. The first is beginning of combat. This is where you can play, this is where your opponent gets priority, which I think, do you want to talk about that now? We'll talk about it later. No, we'll talk about it later. Anyway, I'll just explain it real quick. Priority means that if a player has priority, they get to be the first ones who can play spells. So, the beginning of combat, your opponent can do something to you before you declare your attackers. So in this case, say they had something to tap a creature or something like that. Or if they wanted to play fog on you or something like that, they could do that before you declare attackers, which is your second step. So when you declare attackers, you tap your creature and say, I attack with this at you. Or, and we're going to talk about this in a later video, a planeswalker they control. So, attackers are declared. The third step is declare blockers, where your opponent again has priority. They have this Gold Forged Sentinel.
4/4 flyer.
They can block that Verdant Force. We'll talk about the specifics of combat later and how damage is applied in our next video.
But suffice to say, since the Verdant Force is a 7/7 and the Gold Forged Sentinel is a 4/4, the Verdant Force would survive and the Gold...
7/7, 4/4. We'll go over power and toughness later.
But in this case, the Gold Forged Sentinel
would die. Which happens in the combat damage step, which ends your combat phase.
Yet again, we'll talk about that in our next video, attacking and combat damage. Alright, now we arrive at main phase 2. In main phase 2, you can do anything that you could have done in main phase 1, assuming that you still have enough mana. Now, like I said, I stupidly used all...
Or, before you say that, like we said in our first video, any mana you tap does not carry over between phases, which means...
In my main phase 1, I tapped 8 mana, 8 lands to give me 8 mana. I used 5 of it for Lava Axe, leaving 3 unused. At the end of that main phase 1, the extra 3 mana just fizzles into nothing. So now in main phase 2, I have no mana and thus I can play no spells. However, if I want to, I still haven't played a land for turn, so I could say, play a forest that I hadn't played. You can only play 1 land a turn. It's also good to note that most players won't do anything in main phase 1 if they're going to do something.
Unless it's applicable to, like,
What they're
killing a blocker beforehand or something like
Right.
that, which we will go over in our next video.
But you'll see most players make most of their moves in main phase 2.
So after main phase 2 is ended, you go into your end phase, and that also involves 2 steps. So the first step is the end of turn step, and that only matters because of cards that will say, at the end of your turn, or during the end step, do this. And then after that happens, any effects you have resolve. The second step of the end phase is the cleanup step, and that basically means any state-based effects that are on the field happen and resolve. And also, if you have more than 7 cards in your hand, you must discard down to 7 cards. That's the most important part of it.
So if you have 9 cards in your hand,
You discard 2. So, yeah, that's the phases of your turn.
Yep. So I hope you guys learned a lot, learned how to use mana to play stuff, learned to not waste your mana, and keep it in check. I hope you'll stick with us for our next video on combat damage and attacking.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.